So in case you ever wondered what the Tacoma R150 transmission looks like and works on the inside, I'm currently putting this one back together, but I figure I'd shoot this video just in case anybody's curious about it. So it's got a few main components. This is the engine side over here. This is where the clutch plate would be up against the motor. So this here is your input shaft. The input shaft goes all the way to this synchro here. You can kind of see where this is stopped and this is going. So this is the input shaft right here. It's the shortest piece in the transmission. From here on this way is the output shaft, and the piece down here is called the counter gear. It's also referred to as the cluster gear because it's a one-piece shaft with 5 gears on it, and they're not removable. They're just part of the assembly. It's just how it's made. So you have the gears go, if we go in order, you have the front main bearing. This gear right here is the counter shaft drive gear, sometimes referred to as fourth, but in reality this gear doesn't drive anything. And when you're in fourth gear, it simply just freewheels the counter shaft. This is your fourth gear synchro right there. This would be your direct 1-to-1 ratio engagement. That's what locks the input to the output. This here is the third gear. This is also the third gear synchro right here. Then past that, you have your second gear synchro, the shifting ring. The shifting ring also acts as the reverse gear ring. I'll get to that last. And then over here is the first gear synchro, and this large gear here is first gear. Then on the other side of the middle housing is, on the tail end, is the fifth gear itself that's attached to the output shaft. Then you have a spacer, and then you have the rear output shaft bearing, which I'm missing. That one's still in the mail. And coming backwards, over here, you have the counter shaft, or the cluster gear, has its own bearing in the housing. You have the gear where the whole cluster gear is driven by. So the input shaft comes in and the torque gets transferred this way to the counter shaft and then to whichever gear you're shifted to. So if you were in, let's say we'll start in first gear, the torque is being transferred from the input shaft to this gear, down to the counter shaft, down to the small gear on the counter shaft that you can't see where the tip of the pencil is. And then that torque gets transferred to this big gear and then out to your drive shaft, or in my case, the transfer case. So if I spin, this gear is locked solid. So that's part of that. Then on second gear, when you shift into second gear this way, when this fork moves over, the torque now goes from your flywheel down to the cluster gear once again and over to the second gear, and the torque comes up and spins this gear right here, and then it transfers the torque back out the output shaft. On third, when this guy's in neutral, this guy's in third, this gear is engaged. So it comes in through the input shaft, down the cluster gear, over to the third counter gear, up to the third gear, and then out all the way through to the output shaft. Now when you're in fourth gear, the cluster gear or the counter shaft is just simply freewheeling. It's not doing anything. And all these bearings here, all these gears that are not used, they're spinning on a roller bearing, which I have. So all the gears that are not shifted, that are currently in neutral, let's say you're in fourth, so 1, 2, and 3 are just freewheeling on the shaft. So there's these roller bearings inside the gear, and this one happens to be from first gear, and this one's underneath second gear, and then there's third, and then the input shaft has its own needle bearings inside. So those gears just spin freely on the thing. So fourth gear, simply this ring locks, and I can actually do it. It is very hard to shift when the transmission's not assembled. But you see now this has scooted over, and now this upper shaft is completely locked straight through. So this is your 1-to-1 ratio all the way through the transmission. So if you're towing under heavy load and you can use fourth gear, I recommend using fourth gear because all the torque comes straight through. There is no lateral load sideways coming through the counter shaft, because if you, let's say you were in third gear, the torque would be transferred down, back up through the third counter, third, and then over. So your torque kind of goes to the side, which loads up the bearings sideways. So fourth gear is technically the strongest gear in the transmission. So now we take it out of fourth. So that's neutral. So there's third gear now. So now the torque is coming this way down to the cluster, over to the third gear, counter gear on the cluster, then up to the third gear, and then all the way through to the output shaft. So although you can't, it's hard to tell in the camera, but I'm spinning the clutch at 1 speed, and obviously the output shaft is turning slower. So now we go back into neutral, and then over here we can go to second gear. So there's second gear. So now the torque is coming from the input shaft down the cluster over to the second gear counter, to the second gear, and straight out the output shaft to your transfer case or your drive line. This gear, this ring, and this ring, they're solid on the shaft. That's what hooks on these gears to be connected all the way through. That's how it works. So second gear now, and you know, as I spin it, obviously the output turns a lot slower. It's hard to see it on the camera though. So now we go back to neutral, and now we're gonna go to first gear. So there's first gear. So now you can kind of see how fast I'm spinning this, and you see how fast this is spinning. It's kind of slow, so you definitely see the ratio now of how it's going. And now the torque's going here to the counter gear drive, the counter gear itself, over all the way to the end, down to that gear, which is hard to see. It's the smallest one down at the end on the counter shaft, up to this big gear, and then straight out, and that is first. The next one is so there's neutral, you can kind of see how the output shaft is stopped. You can see these rings are stopped. So this is neutral. This is what happens when your truck's in neutral and your engine is just idling. This just turns like that. So the next gear is the fifth. The fifth is an add-on, as usually always on a 5-speed. Came in as an afterthought, and that's how they did it from the beginning. They stuck it on the back side. So you have your counter shaft that turns. I'm gonna hold this. So you see the end ring. You see this is the hard gear that's attached to the counter shaft. So you can see it in neutral, it's spinning. So when you engage fifth gear, this ring slides over and grabs on the fifth gear engagement right there. So now when I spin it, now the output's actually going to go faster than the engine because it is an overdrive gear. And you can see that by the big gear driving the little gear. So it kind of makes sense right there. And that's it for fifth gear. This fork can go both ways, but as you see, there is no other gear, engagement gear like they have over here. There's one on each side for 1, 2, 3, 4. This one's number 5. There's nothing here because when you come all the way over, you're actually engaging reverse. So as you know, on the Tacoma, reverse is straight down from fifth. So if we were to engage reverse, you can see this just does nothing. This just moves over. But all the other stuff happens over on this side. So this here is the reverse gear. It's the reverse idler, which simply connects the cluster shaft to the reverse ring, which is hooked to the output shaft. So you can see that. So when you shift into reverse, there's like an arm inside there, and it flings this gear over and engages the cluster gear to the reverse ring on the output shaft, like so. And now you see it, now it'll turn backwards. So I turn this one way, and this guy's turning the other way, opposite. And that's about all that's really to it. So there's neutral again. And then that's where the clutch will go. Your pilot bearing goes right here. I might even have it laying around, I think, somewhere. Big pile of mess. This is the pilot bearing. So this is inside the flywheel. You can see this one's pretty dead. And that's how it plugs into your engine. And then the pressure plate is over here, and the flywheel is over here. And then the housing, not much to it. It's just a case. You can see just the holes for the two bearings on the front of the transmission. So the two bearings that are right there. It just slides in there. This is for the reverse gear idler. And in the front, there's really not much to it. Just where the shift fork goes. This is where the shift fork hooks on. Set this kind of the right way. But this is your shift fork. So this goes here. This actually attaches there. So when you step on the clutch, the little cylinder that goes here, I have it off now, it pushes on this lever, and the forks push on the throwout bearing, which would be over here. And actually I think I got it right here. So this guy, with springs, it attaches right here, and it just goes back and forth and pushes on the pressure plate, which the pressure plate is right there. Then this is the rear housing. This one's got a little more stuff in it. It's got this is where the shifter plugs into. So when you go side to side and back and forth with your shifter, this lever here goes into the shifting rods in the transmission. So you see the slots right here. So that lever actually goes up and down in these and then moves these three levers back and forth. So you have first and second, third and fourth, reverse and fifth. Also in here, this little doohickey, this is the reverse lockout. So what it does, when you shift into fifth gear and you're going down the freeway and you go to slam it into fourth, this little lever makes sure that you don't go down into reverse. I don't know if you probably never noticed it when you're driving your 5-speed, because you automatically just go into fourth. But if you're actually rolling in fifth and you try to put it straight into reverse, it won't go. You have to be in neutral and then you can go into reverse. So you would see it right there. You know, you're in fifth and straight into reverse won't go unless you return the stick shift to the center position. Then you put it back above reverse and then into reverse. So you kind of see how that works. It's just a safety thing so you don't destroy a reverse on the freeway. So that's about it. And you got a couple sensors here. There's a reverse switch. Reverse switch goes in here. And that's it. Until next time.